Nada Al-Nashif, the Assistant Director General of Social and Human Sciences at the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. We also have the Deputy Director General at the Department of Social Development, Nelisiwe Vilakazi. Ladies, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you.
All right, Nada, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about the scale of migration on the continent in general. What are we looking at?
Well, I think, first of all, it is becoming a hugely political issue. It's a very complex issue, and we've had a lot of debate recently. I think the African continent has a very important role to play because a lot of the mobility that happens is actually within the region of Africa and actually intra-regional. And I think that there are many different forces at work. We need to hear the voices of Africa much more, and that's the point of converging here actually in Johannesburg. The conference is about Southern perspectives on migration and the need to understand a little bit more what are the parts of this phenomenon.
All right. DDG, what are we looking at? I mean, in terms of the legal and the illegal migrants, do you lavish the same kind of attention when it comes to the the illegal immigrants as compared to the legal ones?
They both qualify for the same attention because in some instances you find that those that are migrants are children, and in terms of our constitution in the country we cannot discriminate those whether they are legal or not, but they will have to get the services from government. But what is important in terms of this conference was the issue of understanding the migration as a phenomenon and also getting the experiences and the research that has been made by the academia, the other experts, so that we look into migration in totality, whether illegal or not.
Okay. Now, on the issue of voluntary and involuntary migration, what are the stats that you have collated so far? I would imagine the number of immigrants coming into the country is greater as a result of those fleeing political or economic conflicts in their countries of origin, natural disasters, etc., as we haven't really experienced such on a grand scale in South Africa.
Yes, currently what we were talking about is the fact that we do need to have empirical evidence, even in terms of the statistics, because no one has the correct and accurate statistics in terms of the migrants within the country. Yes. Okay.
Nada, you mentioned the politicization of migration. I want to engage you more on that. I mean, the nation-state concept made immigration a political issue. I mean, by definition, it is a homeland of a nation defined by shared ethnic or cultural values. This has inevitably led to social tensions such as identity crisis, such as xenophobia. Shouldn't we divorce politics from the issue of migration and then, of course, dismantle the cultural divides between those groups?
Absolutely. Let me just start by saying that the whole point of having this conference is that in December of this year, the Global Compact of Migration is going to be signed by member states. The world will come back to Africa, meeting in Marrakesh in Morocco this December, to agree on a compact that sets some of the building blocks of this agreement. The main elements are, first of all, it emphasizes the integrated nature of the cycle. So migration, we are convinced, should be a choice. It should not be involuntary. And yet, as you're saying, due to natural conflicts, natural disasters, the nature of searching for economic livelihoods, unemployment, a whole host of reasons, people are on the move. And we need to distinguish the drivers of mobility to understand a little bit better what to do about it. But what the compact does is, first of all, insist on the human rights-based approach. This is about human dignity. The Deputy Director General spoke about women and children on the move, which hasn't happened in this scale for a very long period of time. And what's important is it needs to be an integrated approach to the solutions. We need to work together. We need the work of government, of local authorities, we need international organizations, but we really need to understand what we're talking about when we talk about the rights-based approach.
Yeah, talk us through that. What do you mean by human rights-based approach?
It means that people have a minimum there's a minimum obligation to treat people with some element of human dignity. So it's understanding their rights. When people move, countries of origin, countries of destination, you need to understand what propels them to make that move and therefore give them rights. Migrants have a right to jobs, they have a right to freedom of expression, and I think there's been an alarming rise in a discourse which is very negative. I mean, we're in Johannesburg. This city was built on the backs of waves of migration. We're talking about the cultural enrichment, the diversity that comes with understanding multiple groups of people coexisting together. Of course, there are tensions. Normally, they come a lot out of ignorance, I think, and I think this new language that we are seeing across the world, much beyond Africa, increasing intolerance, the rise of xenophobia, discrimination, that's a big role that UNESCO wants to play in understanding how we can do better to include migrants in the social fabric of the communities they come to.
Okay. DDG, how much of an impact does migration have on a country's economy? I mean, we're talking of the emigration of human resource and the labor force here.
Yeah, for us as South Africa, I think the fact that we have the constitution that acknowledges that it's a human rights approach that we need to implement, you find that as they come to the country, we have to ensure that we offer those services that we can, because as she has already shared with us, there are those that come voluntarily and those that come illegally, but it's important that we respond to them, because some of them, we strongly believe that if you are a migrant, it must be a choice, and so that it gets that human dignity in terms of how we respond to them as the country. But it does affect the issue of the resources, because in migration is there are factors that contribute to it. The pull factors, it's when you have human resources that go to other countries, like your engineers, your doctors. But the push one is based on the fact that people, they leave because of the situation in those countries, be it poverty, inequality, and so on. Then it does affect issues around human resources, because by the time they come to your country, there is this competition of the limited resources that you also have. Then that causes tensions in those countries as well.
An analyst was actually saying that making the pull factor so attractive for a country actually discriminates against the locals, because they find themselves being left out, and then inviting all the labor force from their foreign countries to come in, work in a certain country.
Yes, I agree with that, but I think the countries who lose the human resources, they must come up with their retention strategies, so that there is nothing that will attract me as an engineer to go to another country, because my country takes care of me in terms of my the skills that I have. I think that option can assist and bring that cooperation amongst countries in the area.
Okay.
And in actual fact, in actual fact, many times these migrants are actually doing the jobs that the nationals will not do in many communities. So it's not often so clear-cut. I think there is a way to organize productivity and labor to ensure that there is a complementarity, to also make sure that you are trying to preempt your labor shortages. In many countries now, we have a real need for skills, and the migrant labor is often highly developed in some areas that we are lacking. So I think the issue is to make sure that there is a dialogue between countries of origin, countries of destination, to understand that there is a safe and orderly migration. That's really what we want. We want to make sure that people are not drowning as they cross the Mediterranean. We want to make sure that people are not suffering because of this forced displacement, which is due to conflict. And we're trying to understand how climate change increasingly is forcing people to flee their homelands in search of just sustainable livelihoods. I think the more we have an understanding of the complexity of how this comes together, then we will be working on the push and the pull factors in a much more rational and coherent way.
And the forced displacement of citizens, as I've just rightly mentioned, doesn't it have, or rather contribute to the tensions in the foreign policy, the relations of foreign countries? I mean, we've seen so many Syrian refugees fleeing their country of origin to other European countries, and that has caused so much tension.
Of course, but I think we have to be careful, because actually the numbers of refugees that are all the way in Europe now are minimal compared to the number of refugees that are in the neighborhood. The same as in Africa. I mean, in West Africa, the inter-regional movement is 84% of the migration movement. So the real issue is the headlines, the sensationalization of the news, which is really driven a little bit by the perspective of the West, because that's the news that we see, that's the news that's the loudest, that's the clearest, is actually only a small part of that. If you look at a country like Lebanon, Lebanon has a population of less than 4 million. It has over 1 million refugees, 25%. That's a lot of pressure on coping systems, on basic services provision, on health and education, and the international community helps, the same as in Uganda, in South Sudan. We're trying to look at the host community and the migrant communities and try to understand. There are differences, of course, between refugees and migrants, but I think this compact is going to help us try to sort it out, go back a little bit to the definitions, and then decide together. The global governance issue is a very big one. No one country can do it on its own. It really needs to be this international community and the political will to make it migration a choice, not a forced decision.
From your observation and analysis, how has the reception been like in those foreign countries for the immigrants? We know that in South Africa there's been pockets of violence or of xenophobic attacks momentarily.
Well, I mean, I think obviously we are at a time of great economic constraint, even in this sub-region. I think anywhere that there is a perceived threat to livelihoods, people react. I think even if they are brothers and sisters, even if they are culturally the same, even if they are from the same religious or ethnic minorities or groups, the real issue is what are we competing for? At the time of scarcity of resources, where there is not enough policy around how to integrate them, where there is not enough preparedness, where I think local authorities don't take the role, civil society organizations are doing an enormous amount, but it's very difficult when the resources are so stretched. And I think then we fall into this negative discourse. We believe that there is a lot of richness in what the migrant has to offer, and we believe that it can be managed in a way that is win-win. But obviously, once you get into the negative, the media has a big role to play. We're very grateful to be here to try to clarify some of these things. But I think we fall into the sensationalization and then the playing on the fears. And then the xenophobia sets in. Okay. And I think that's just a vicious circle that we have to revert.
Okay. Now, DDG, on the issue of managing migration, has there been a line of communication between South Africa and the other foreign countries of origin of those migrants in order to manage the migration, be it legal or illegal migrants?
There are programs in South Africa. Remember that how we tackle this, different departments are given some responsibilities in terms of even managing our borders and so on. But our approach in terms of this conference is the fact that in order for us as the countries within the SADC region to come up with a relevant perspective on the migration, let us get the empirical evidence in terms of what is actually happening there, so that we can come up with informed policies that will respond to the issue of migration in the SADC region. By so doing, we'll then come up with some good solutions. The beauty about this is that in this conference we work with the UN agencies, like she's from UNESCO. Yes, and then there's also IOM, which is an international organization on migration, and UNESCO, and then us, the government of South Africa, and the Wits University. So all of us together, we can come up with some solutions in terms of the issue of migration in the country. But mainly what worries us are issues of the children and unaccompanied minors, who some of them work in the farms. You'll know that some of them, they work in the those zamazamas in unused disused mines. Yes, so that becomes a problem, because that one is illegal and is unethical, that you can allow children to work in those conditions. Right. So those are other social problems then that compels us to do something in order to give attention to this issue of migration, whilst we feel that it's important for the researchers to assist us and come up with informed and relevant policies on this matter.
DDG Nelisiwe Vilakazi and Nada Al-Nashif. Thank you so much to you two ladies for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, that is Nada Al-Nashif from UNESCO and Nelisiwe Vilakazi from the Department of Social Development.